Hi everyone. We have just come live slightly before the schedule. We would like to know if the reception is proper and you can see the screen as well as the presentation. We will hold on with the presentation for the next 2 3 minutes so that we can get a feedback about the reception and the quality of the sound as well as video. So, Aditya, let's wait for a minute or two before we start the session.
Yes, sure.
And Aditya, you can go either in Marathi, English, जे काय suitable असेल ते.
Yes, चालेल.
Yeah. So I have got messages saying that the presentation is visible as well as the sound and video quality is perfect. So I'd like to welcome today Aditya with us. If most of you have been following online uh, videos and channels about astrophotography, his name is definitely going to pop up in the top list. He's a youngster doing his engineering from Pune. Currently, he is in Konkan area with his grandparents, if I am correct. And he started doing astrophotography, and some of his images became quite popular, and he featured in the Brat uh, online channel. Is that right, Aditya? The Brat is the name,
Yes, Brute.
right?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
Brut.
right.
And that's how I got enthused about this thing as well, and thought, why not get in touch with him and ask if he would be able to spare his time and share with our viewers what exactly astrophotography is and what is this hobby to begin with. Because when we talk about astronomy, it becomes a field where we are little scared to begin with, whether we'll be able to identify the stars, the planets that we see, and forget about photography. It's difficult to identify and then how to photograph them. So it kind of lit up my mind as well, and I got in touch with Aditya. He was quite happy to interact with me and say that he will be happy to share the presentation and share his views about astrophotography and astronomy as a hobby, as well as I'm sure he will enlighten our viewers about taking up this hobby and give some vital tips about going ahead into this. So I will welcome Aditya and pass on the baton to him. I will mute myself as well as close down the video so that the bandwidth issue will not be there as much as possible. Aditya, if you would like to have a quick introduction about yourself, the points which I might have missed, and then you can kindly proceed.
Yes, sure. Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Aditya Kinzavdekar, and today I am going to conduct this session on astrophotography. So, I am 20 years old, and I am currently pursuing electronics and telecommunication engineering from Pune University. And I also volunteer at an organization here in Pune, which is known as Jyotirvidya Parisonstha, and it is India's oldest association of amateur astronomers, which was founded in 1944. So I volunteer for their public outreach programs and stargazing activities, etc. So I'll just briefly tell how I got into astrophotography or astronomy. So I was into astronomy ever since I was a child, and I used to watch space-related movies and movies all the time. So my parents saw this, and when I passed my 10th standards, they bought me a telescope. So I was really excited, and I used to gaze at different stars, galaxies, nebulae from my terrace in Pune all the time. And eventually, I started thinking that how can I take images of these objects that I see through my telescope. So I just took my phone and tried to take images with it, and obviously I failed miserably. I had no idea how to do astrophotography or how to take images and all. So I then started reading on online astrophotography forums, started watching YouTube videos, and at the same time, I also joined Jyotirvidya Bhare Sanstha, where some of the volunteers helped me uh, get basic concepts of astrophotography. And it has been 3 to 4 years now that I have been doing astrophotography, and uh, I will show some of my work later in this video. So let's get started with this presentation. So this session is going to be a practical approach. So by the end of this session, anybody with any whatever equipment you already have, you can get started with astrophotography, go out and take some good images of the night sky. So let's get started.
We have lost Aditya's connection. Let's hang on for a minute. He will be back. So, as he was mentioning that he started taking up this hobby after he passed his 10th standard,
Of photography.
and yeah, Aditya, can you start
Yes.
with the first slide, please? The connection was lost in between.
Okay, okay. Okay, so just I said that this session is going to be a practical approach. So by the end of this, anybody who attends this session will be able to go out and take some good images of the night sky with whatever equipment they already have. Okay, so photography. So there are different types of photographies like portrait, wildlife, bird, micro, sports, black and white food, and just like that, there's also astrophotography. So in astrophotography, we take images of different objects that are in the night sky, like galaxies, nebulae, star clusters, comets, meteors. Basically, everything that is in the night sky, including planets, moon, and sun. So before we get directly into astrophotography, first I will explain few concepts, basic concepts of photography and astronomy that you need to know in order to do astrophotography well. So let's get started. So, in any type of photography, there are three basic ingredients, and those are shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. So, these three things are known as three pillars of photography, and they are the basic building blocks. And uh, the values of these three things are very crucial if you want to get a really good, well exposed image. So first is shutter speed. So shutter speed are also, which is also known as the exposure time, is the amount of time the imaging plane is exposed to light. So in modern day cameras, imaging plane is the camera sensor. So the shutter speed is the time for which the sensor was exposed to light. Then there's aperture. So aperture is the physical opening in the lens controlling how much light falls into the camera. So usually aperture value is given by the f number. So you can see on any DSLR or any mirrorless or any point and shoot camera, you can see there's the focal length of the lens written on the front of the lens, and there's also written f number. So that f number stands for the ratio which is between the focal length of the lens and the physical front opening of the lens. So suppose there's a lens which is 50 millimeters, which has focal length of 50 millimeters, and the front diameter of the lens is 25 millimeters. So 50 divided by 25 gives us 2. So that prime lens has the focal ratio or f value of 2. Then there is also ISO. So in olden days, there were film cameras, and those film cameras used to use film rolls, and they had actual the physical amount of grain inside of them. But in modern day cameras, we don't use that anymore. So in modern day cameras, the ISO value is basically just the amplification that is applied to the raw data of the sensor. So these three things, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, form up the exposure triangle, and we have to choose these three things very judiciously in order to get a really good image. So yeah, so all photographs are made from these three ingredients, which contribute to the overall exposure and appearance of the image. So shutter speed.
Aditya,
So we yes.
yeah, so if I may interrupt you while you were on the earlier slide, I would like to, enlighten the viewers that in the modern cameras, we are blessed to have the chip, which gives us the
Yes.
play time to work around these features. And like most of you who have been to wildlife parks or do bird photography, you would be aware that we can change and make a difference in how the end product comes. When Aditya was telling about the length, f-stop, and all these things, if anybody has some points about it and they would like to ask him about it, you can definitely put it in the chat box, and he would be happy to answer them at end of the session.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so may I continue? Okay, so we need to choose the values of these three things very judiciously. And if we don't do so, then there are some artifacts, or the final image is not very good, or we don't get our desired image. So what are these three things? So the aperture. So as I already told, the aperture is given by the f number. So uh, the f number is inversely proportional to the amount of light that gets into the camera. So here in this line, you can see the f1.4 has a big opening, and f3.2 has already almost non-existent opening. So as the physical opening here is bigger, the amount of light that falls in is really uh, much more than f32. So in astrophotography, we need the lowest aperture number that we can use on our lens. Just a second, Amol sir, am I still audible?
You are audible. You are audible, Aditya.
Yes, okay, okay. Okay, so in astrophotography, we need to use the lowest f number that your lens or telescope supports, and on camera lens, on smartphone lenses, it is usually f1.8, or in kit lenses in cameras, it is usually f3.5. So we need to use the lowest number, as we need the maximum light that falls onto the lens. We cannot lose that anymore for any further. So yeah, that is that. But as we keep lowering the aperture number, there's advantage or disadvantage that is of losing the depth of field. So as we set our lens to the lowest f number, our depth of field is really shallow, and we can only focus on one thing at a time. So here you can see at f1.4, the only the human here is in focus, but background, the mountains or the sun is out of focus. And it is good for portrait photography, but not so if you are into astrophotography, or if you are into landscape photography, because you need everything in focus. So in those areas like landscape photography, you need to use higher f ratios, because you need everything in focus. You kind of need high dynamic range. So that's aperture. Then there comes the ISO value. So as I already told, it's just the amount of amplification that is applied to the camera sensor. So in modern day cameras with digital sensors, we don't really have to worry much of the ISO value, as it is just the digital amplification, and we can play with that later in post processing. But in general terms, lower ISO values gives you cleaner images. It has less noise and it has less artifacts to deal with. And if you go on increasing the ISO, you brighten up the image, but you introduce a lot of noise in the image. So that is also a thing to consider. In astrophotography, we need uh, ISO values on the higher side because the stars or galaxies nebulae are really faint and we need bright image. So ISO 3200 or ISO 6400 is a good starting point. And then comes the shutter speed. So in daytime photography, we usually use shutter speeds that are 100 1 by 100th of a second or 1 by 10,000th of a second. So what that means is that when we take the image, the sensor is exposed to light for only 1 by 1,000th of a second, so it is really fast. And since we have a really bright sun and light is not a very issue in daytime, that shutter speed is sufficient to take a well exposed image. But as we uh, start taking nighttime images, 1 by 1,000th of a second is nothing at all. You won't be able to see a single star in that shutter speed. So we need to increase the shutter speed to up to few seconds or sometimes up to few minutes in order to get uh, in order to gather enough light to make a good image. But there are some disadvantages with that, with this one too. So if we go on increasing the shutter speed, the sensor is going to be exposed to light for much longer. And if you are suppose if you are doing wildlife photography, you are ought to use 1 by 1,000 or even faster shutter speed, as you need to freeze that object in motion. So suppose if there's a bird flying, you have to use a very fast shutter speed so that you can capture that bird in motion. But if you are using suppose half second shutter speed for a bird, you will get a very blurry and not really good image, as the bird would have moved in that half second. So for daytime photography or fast moving objects, we need fast shutter speeds. But in astrophotography or low light, we need slower shutter speeds or more time in exposure. Then there's this very important setting in camera that you need to do for astrophotography. So there are basically different types of camera file formats. So there are mainly two, which are JPEG and RAW. So a JPEG file is a compressed version of RAW format, and it is uh, what we usually get in our phone. So JPEG files are really small and they are good to quickly share on social media, but they don't usually store all the raw sensor information and they are very compressed. So for example, a JPEG file from camera usually is about 15 MB or so, which is really small and good for sharing on social media, but it loses all the raw data which we need in astrophotography. Whereas raw files, they are usually a lot bigger, so say about 50 to 60 MB for one image, but they store all the raw sensor information, and that is really needed for astrophotography, as we already deal in low light conditions. We cannot lose the light any further, so we need all the raw sensor data that is available in our images. So in astrophotography and usually in any type of photography, you should always shoot in raw, as it also gives you more opportunity to process in post processing in Photoshop or Lightroom, etc. So for astrophotography, check mark for raw and not JPEG. Okay, so you might be wondering what type of camera do we need to take to do astrophotography. So the best camera is the one that you already have. So astrophotography can be done with literally any camera that exists in the market. So you can do astrophotography with DSLR or mirrorless cameras, with webcams, with CCTV cameras, point and shoot, or even with smartphone cameras. So smartphone cameras have gotten really good over the years, and any decent or relatively new smartphone can is capable of capturing some really good nighttime photos or sky photos. So, but if you ask what is the recommended or what is the best kind of camera for astrophotography, then it would be the DSLR or mirrorless camera. So since they have interchangeable lens systems, we can replace just or swap out the front lens to a wider lens or more magnification lens, or even we can attach the DSLR camera to a telescope. So it is more versatile, and that is why most of the amateur astrophotographers use DSLR cameras for astrophotography. And so this is DSLR, this is web camera, phone camera, point and shoot, and there's lastly you can see there's a CCD camera. So CCD stands for charge coupled device camera, and these are really high power consumption cameras. They are cooled. So in so as we keep on shooting different images, the sensor gets really hot, and it increases the amount of noise. So these CCD cameras, these observatory grade cameras have cooling in them. So the sensor is cooled below 15 to 20 degrees ambient temperature. So that gives us a really edge over these normal cameras. But these are really expensive, and they demand very high power. They don't even have screens, so they are not really useful in outdoor conditions. So they are only used in observatories. Okay, then there are different optical systems that you can use to do astrophotography. So the first one is a basic camera lens, or just the smartphone if you are going to use that for astrophotography. So any wide angle lens you can use to take wide angle images of our Milky Way galaxy or different constellation shots or sky and landscape, etc. So it is the best kind of way to get into astrophotography, as you learn all the essential things that are needed to do astrophotography with it. And you can be really generous with exposure times, or you can actually experiment a lot with wide angle lenses than these other things. So this is the best way to get into astrophotography. Then there are telephoto lenses. So you might have done astrophotography, wide angle astrophotography, and you feel the need of zooming into the objects and capturing them closely. So then you can use telephoto lenses, and these are really equivalent to some advanced telescopes, but they still have some flaws, that the plane is not very flat, or the stars in the corners are not really sharp. So then we transition into telescopes. So this is a reflector type of telescope which most of the amateur as well as advanced amateur astrophotographers use. So they are comparable to camera lens systems, but they have some really good lens elements, high quality glass, and they also support bigger sensor cameras. So these are for seasoned astrophotographers. And then there are reflecting telescopes. So I will explain working of refracting and reflecting telescopes in the later slides. So these just to give you an idea, refractor telescopes have mirrors in them in their back, and these are really huge. So they are also known as light buckets. So since they have really huge diameters, so 15 centimeters or 20 centimeter diameters, they are kind of like buckets, and they gather light much more than these small telescopes or camera lenses. So these are also used by advanced amateur astrophotographers. Okay, so there are basically, as I already said, two types of optical systems mainly. So the first one is a refractor telescope. So it is also known as Galilean telescope, because Galileo Galilei discovered it and or invented it. And this type of telescope has uh, glass lenses inside them. So here, so the most basic type of telescope has two glass lenses inside it. So the first one is known as objective lens, which gathers the light and it refracts the light onto the secondary lens. And if we want to do visual astronomy with the telescope, we can use the refractor lens, which gathers the light and it refracts the light onto the secondary lens.
Let's wait for a minute. There is some connection issue with Aditya. He's actually at his native place in Konkan area, and there is some connectivity issue over there. So let's wait for a minute. He will be back soon. Yes, Aditya, now you're back.
Okay. Yes, okay. So the reflector telescopes have a secondary mirror at back of, so primary mirror at the back of it, which is a concave mirror. So light from distant object falls onto the primary mirror. It gets reflected onto the secondary mirror, and the secondary mirror is just a basically flat mirror which is tilted at 45 degrees. So the light falls onto the secondary sensor, secondary mirror, and it again gets reflected onto the eyepiece or your your imaging camera if you are doing astrophotography with it. So these are basic two types of telescopes. Then we know how the telescopes work. Now we need to know how to attach our camera to the telescope. So as I already told, there are different types of cameras that you can use to do astrophotography. So the first, or sorry, so the most basic concept is piggyback mounting. So in this type, you are attaching the camera on top of the telescope. So you are not actually utilizing the telescope, you are just attaching it on top of the telescope. So it is good if you want to take images of the objects that you are looking through the telescope. You cannot take images through your telescope, you are just attaching your camera onto the telescope. So you are just photographing that region, but not through the telescope. And then there's mobile phone adapter. So you can attach your smartphone with this adapter to your eyepiece, and you can take images of what exactly you are seeing with the telescope. So it is really good for taking images of the moon or planets, but not really deep sky objects. Then there's T adapter mounting. So this is the most commonly used and the most recommended method of mounting the camera with to the telescope. So to use this type of mounting, we have to first remove the eyepiece from the from the telescope. So here you can see the eyepiece is removed, and we also have to remove lens of the camera. So so those things out of the way, we can just attach this T ring and 1.25-inch bayonet mount to the T-ring, and attach telescope directly to the attach camera directly to telescope. So in this way we get rid of all the lens elements that are in the middle, and our telescope acts like a lens. So this is the most preferred way of doing astrophotography. Then there's also variable projection eyepiece of photography. So in this, so this is really similar to T adapter mounting, but in this type we also insert an eyepiece in between so that we can vary the magnification of the telescope. Okay, so unless you are a flat earther, you might know that the Earth rotates around itself, around its polar axis, and the stars move in the night sky. So you might have seen that all the stars or planets or the moon or sun rises from the east and sets in the west. So that is because the Earth rotates around its polar axis. So since we are standing on Earth, we cannot actually recognize this motion, or we don't actually feel it, but but the stars in the sky appear to move. So they are not stationary, but they are rising from the east and sitting in the west. So there's also an interesting fact. So the Polaris, North Star, or Dhruva Tara lies exactly on the polar axis of the Earth, so that it is usually, so that thing is really useful for us astrophotographers, because since we can see that the Earth, uh, rotational axis of the Earth coincides with Polaris. All the stars that rise from the east and set to the west appear to make concentric circles around the Polaris. So, if we take really long exposures of the Polaris, we can see that the Polaris is just steady, or Dhruvatara is a steady in the center, and all these stars form these concentric circles around it. So, it is very useful for astrophotography, and you might be wondering why so. So I'll explain. Okay, so I'll explain that in the later part of the video, or of the this session. So okay, so that you know that the stars are not stationary in the sky and they move throughout the night. So if we take really long exposures like 30 seconds or 1 minute, 2 minute long exposures, then we see that these stars form really long trails in the images. And if we want a really good sharp image of our galaxy or constellation, we don't want these star trails in our images. So to get rid of those star trails, there are some two rules that we can use or follow to get sharp pinpoint stars. And the first one is known as the rule of 500. And the rule of 500 is the most commonly used rule to get rid of star tails or to determine the right exposure to get a star trail less images. And then there's also NPF rule, which is more advanced rule, and I will explain them both. So I would suggest you all to take screenshot of these couple of slides if you want to do astrophotography with untracked astrophotography with camera or smartphone, because this is how you will know what the right shutter speed for your camera is. So the rule of 500. So depending on what type of camera you are using, whether it's crop frame camera or a full frame camera, it's either 400 rule or 600 rule. So what this rule says is that you take 500 and divide it by the focal length of your lens. So it gives us the amount of time in seconds up to which you can expose without getting star trails in your images. So for example, here you can see they have used a 20 millimeter lens which has focal length of 20 millimeters. So we take 500, divide it by 20, and we end up with 25 seconds. So with this lens and a camera, we can expose up to 25 seconds before the stars start forming apparent trails. So for this lens, 25 seconds is the optimum exposure value. Okay, so here is an example of the 500 rule. So here you can see by the exit, this guy has used Sony A7R II camera, which is a full frame camera, and he has used a 15 millimeter lens. So by the rule of 500, what we do is 500 divided by 50, and we end up with about 32 or so second optimum exposure value. So this guy has used a 30-second exposure, and you can see there are still some small tails, but they are not very apparent in the full image. So here, yeah, the 500 rule has worked great, and you can see a really beautiful image of our Milky Way galaxy, which this guy has took without help of any tracker or any advanced telescope or any advanced equipment. So yeah, but there are a few drawbacks of the 500 rules, that are the 500 rule is not actually designed for modern cameras who have high megapixel counts, or they have medium format, or if you want to uh, do huge prints of your images, the 500 rule does not work really great. So it also does not take into account these factors like pixel density, aperture, and diffraction, which the other NPF rule does. So here again, take a screenshot if you want. So the NPF rule is the more sophisticated way to calculate for sharp stars. And the formula for NPF rule goes like this. So 35 into lens aperture plus 35 into pixel pitch divided by lens focal length. So here lens aperture is the f ratio or f value that your lens has, and you should use the lowest f value of your lens. Then the pixel pitch. So pixel pitch is very specific to your camera. You can either google it, or you can see it in the next slide, and you can see if you can find your camera in the list. So it is very specific. Actually, pixel pitch is the uh, width of each pixel on your camera sensor, and it is really small in microns. So it's better if you just google pixel pitch for your specific camera and use it in the formula. And then there's also lens focal length. So here for this example, they have used a 24 millimeter focal length lens, which has a aperture value of f2.8, and the camera they have used is 5D Mark IV. So it is a full frame camera. So by this formula, 35 into lens aperture, which is f2.8, plus 35 into pixel pitch. So a pixel pitch for this specific camera is 5.36. So we have multiplied that and then divided by lens focal length. So it is 24. So we end up with 11.9, so almost 12 seconds. So with this setup and with NPF rule, you should expose up to 12 seconds before the stars start forming apparent trails. So, and this would be actually really accurate, more than the 500 rule we used previously. So I would recommend you to use NPF rule instead of 500 rule if you want some good images. Okay, yeah, so like I already said, pixel pitch. Here is a table for pixel pitch of some popular cameras. You can also just Google and find the exact pixel pitch for your specific camera. Okay, so you might be wondering, like I am now limited to a certain number of seconds before the stars start forming apparent trails, but I don't want that. I want to expose much longer. So yeah, so like this fictional character Creed would say, "Listen, I got the answer. You get a tracking mount, and all your problems go away." So there are tracking mounts which you can use to take astro photos. So basically, these mounts track the stars or objects in the night sky as they uh, move throughout the night, and then you are not just limited to a few seconds exposure time, and you can actually expose up to few minutes, like 4 minutes or 5 minutes, without getting star trails. So this is a big picture or illustration of a tracking mount, and that is the Vixen Polari mount, and here is a camera attached to it. So here you can see this is one image that is captured with Canon XSI or 450D with 400 millimeters focal length, and here they have used 5 images of 5 minutes exposure each. So if you calculate, so since Canon XSR 450D is a crop frame camera, with you should use the 400 rule, and with the 400 rule, 400 divided by 400, you end up with only 1 second exposure. So theoretically, with the rule we learned previously, this guy should have only taken exposures of 1 second, but here you can see he has taken images of 5 minutes per image. So that is the advantage that a tracking mount gives us. We can expose a lot longer and get some good images. Okay, so like I said, there are tracking mounts, and the most commonly used mount in astrophotography is the equatorial mount. And this equatorial mount, so this is a special type of telescope mount which we need to align with the night sky. So how do we? We firstly, in equatorial mount, we have a polar axis and a polar scope embedded in it. So as I said, the Earth rotates around its polar axis, and the Polaris lies exactly on polar axis. So if we align our equatorial mount with the Polaris, and after we do so, we can basically just rotate the RA axis and track any object or star in the night sky, as it is just going to make concentric circles around Polaris. So if we align this polar axis with Polaris, we can track any object with an equatorial mount. So this is how the basic equatorial telescope mount works. We don't need to get in details on how that works. This is just how the equatorial mount works. Okay, so now you know how what are the basic concepts of photography that we need to use in astrophotography. Then what are the different optical systems? What is an equatorial mount? So now I will explain the basic workflow in astrophotography. like how we do astrophotography from the start to beginning. So first, the first step is setting up the equipment. So now you have your equatorial mount that if you are using equatorial mount, you have the equatorial mount that you need to align with Polaris, and then you have to align it with the stars. And if you are using just a smartphone or a camera without any tracker, you just need a tripod, and that's it. Then after that, alignment, which is only needed for equatorial mounts and not for smartphone or DSLR photography. Then the next step is data acquisition. So now you have decided your object, you have set up everything. Now you just need to acquire all the data. That means you need to just take all the images. Then the next step is pre-processing. So in order to get really good results, we need to pre-process and post-process our images. So since the stars and nebula galaxies are really faint, we have limitations and we cannot actually get really long exposures of them, and we can't gather enough data to get really bright views. So we have to use different pre-processing and post-processing techniques in order to get some good images. And after we do that, we have to do some final touches, the color saturation boost or contrast enhancements, before we can actually post the image. Or okay, so the first thing was data acquisition. So now you have set up your telescope on your equatorial mount, or you are just out with your tripod and camera or with your smartphone. Then you first thing you need to do is data acquisition. So if you are using a smartphone, there are a few apps like Astrocam or Deep Sky Camera, which let you take a series of different images that you can stack later or pre-process and post-process later to get good images. So the data acquisition for smartphone is like different apps like Deep Sky Camera. For DSLRs, the most basic way is that using an intervalometer or remote shutter release cable, and you can basically program a sequence of images on your camera, and the camera automatically keeps on clicking those images. This is the most basic way. Then there's also computer controlled softwares like Backyard EOS. So it is exclusively only for Canon cameras, but there's also Backyard Nikon, which is for Nikon cameras and so on. So these softwares are Windows only. So you can connect your camera to your computer, and you can capture the images from your camera through your computer. So you don't fill up your SD card or so, and you can directly get them on your laptop. So this is the next step. Or if you have a really advanced telescope with automatic focuser or mount, then there's also a software known as Nina, or nighttime. Okay, I forgot the full form. So it is Nina, and it is also used for data acquisition with advanced setups and cameras. Then there are also softwares like SharpCap. So these softwares are useful for planetary and lunar imaging. So it is basically a software that
Much less than in the urban areas. And he was sharing some of those photos with me, and they're really fabulous. They take you to the world which is far away, and you just feel amazing seeing those photos. I think he has been locked off completely. He will join pretty soon. Let me just connect with him on the phone. He's trying to log in. The network has an issue in the place where he is. He'll be back in a minute or so.
हे हे झालं होतं. कधी कधी बाहेर पडलो होतो?
Okay. Yeah, you can continue now.
येस, मी कुठपर्यंत आलो होतो? मला कळलं नाही कधी ड्रॉप झालं इंटरनेट.
So you were on slide number, I will tell you. You were just finishing off slide number 24.
ओके, लेट
Oh,
मी
sorry,
चेक.
sorry. 20. You had just started with slide number 25 actually.
ओके, ओके. Okay, so let me share my screen.
Yeah, can you share the screen?
Yeah, okay, I'll
Perfect.
start.
Yeah.
Okay, so the pre-processing sequence goes like this. So you have taken a number of images of your desired object. So for starting, I usually use 20 to 30 images of the same object without moving the camera, and I load all the images into the pre-processing software. So usually the pre-processing desired pre-processing software for me is Deep Sky Stacker. So what this software does is that it does image registration. It calibrates the image with flats, dark, and bias images, and finally does the stacking. So what that means is that it analyzes every image. It analyzes each and every star in that image, and it stacks the star from all the 30 images on top of each other, giving us a single image. So you might be wondering what is the use of this pre-processing technique. So let me tell you. So here you can see this is uh, one of my images that I had captured in last November. So this is a picture of Orion Nebula, and the image on the left is a single image which was of 30-second exposures, and the image on the right is a result of stacking 100 such images. So you can see the image on the left is really green. It has a lot of noise and it does not look good, but the image on the right is looking really clean, and there's almost no in this image. So this is the power of stacking. So here is another zoomed in view. One is single image of 30-second exposure taken through a telescope, and it was captured at 750 millimeters focal length. So you can see it's a lot of grain noise and a color noise. It is all captured in this second image, and it looks really clean. Another image of the same object, a lot more zoomed in. Image right is a single this time, and image on the left is okay. So we are done with processing part here, and now we move on to the post processing part. So in post processing, where is the part where we take our stacked image. The stacked image has uh, a very less amount of noise in it. So we take that stacked image, and we first thing we do on it is image. So sometimes it is really dark, it is sometimes really bright. So we bring the image to correct brightness with initial stretch. Then the second step we follow is gradient. Most of the times there are some street lights or car lights in your images, and it is very uneven. So half part of your image might have uh, light coming from a car and half does not. So in this gradient removal part, we remove that light gradient and kind of make the image flat. Now we have gotten rid of all the gradients, stretch the even more. And by stretching, I mean we brighten the image, we try to enhance the nebulosity and stars. Then the fourth step is noise reduction. So as you know, in low light we get a lot of noise in our images, and astrophotography is no exception. We our images are filled with noise, as you can see in the previous slide. So in the fourth image, we do noise reduction on our image, and then the fifth step is star reduction. So in deep sky astrophotography, sometimes the stars become too bloated or too big that they hide the faint nebulosity behind them, and the overall effect of the image does not look good. So we have to do star reduction, and by it means we have to reduce or shrink the size of the stars in order to pop the nebulosity. Then there are final stages like color saturation and contrast, and these are done as per your taste. So personally, I don't like to overdo colors and contrast. I like to keep my editing final touches like brightness, contrast. Like you can play with them in Photoshop. Okay, so here is one example, and all these I will explain all these steps with examples. So here you can see this is a single image of the triangle and the Andromeda Galaxy, which are the closest galaxies to our Milky Way galaxy. So this image was captured with a Sony mirrorless camera on a 50 mm lens. So this was not captured with any fancy telescope or any tracking mode. So it was just captured with camera and a prime 50 mm lens. So the lens had number of 1.8, but I stopped it down to f2.8. So yeah, this is a single 30-second image at ISO 5000. Then this is stacked image. So like I said, the stacked image. So this one's and you might be wondering what happened, but we don't have to worry as the all the raw sensor data is still in this image. We just have to do our stretch. Okay, so now we have done the initial stretch on our image. See these galaxies are right, and they we can make out their shape. So this is the Triangulum galaxy, the one on top, and the one on the bottom is Andromeda galaxy, which is the closest galaxy to our Milky Way. It is actually even bigger than our Milky Way. Then now you can see I have shrunken the stars. So here in the first image, you can see in the bottom image there is some cloud-like or fuzzy part. Those are not actually clouds. So that part is I integrated flux nebula, which surrounds Andromeda and Triangulum galaxy, and that is a really faint thing, and you lot more time and a really good dark skies in order to capture that. So in this image, I have you can see it is slightly visible in this image. Then now I have shrunken those stars, so you can see it is even more prominent. So the structures we can make out the structure easily, and you can see a lot. They have kind of so this brownish color too. And now I have gone one step even further and made the image starless. So I have removed all the stars in this image by using different techniques in photography processing software. So that gotten rid of all the stars, you can clearly see those IFN structures and these two galaxies. This looks really good. What I have done is that I have processed these images, starless images, and combined them with the star image. So this is the final result that I came up with, and you can see I increased saturation a bit, and the triangulum galaxy, which is kind of bluish in color, is clearly visible, and the Andromeda has a yellowish or orangish color, and these IFN structures are really and the final image of Triangulum and Andromeda galaxy. It was captured with a 50 millimeter lens on a Sony full frame camera, and the overall exposure for this image was over 2 hours. So yeah, that is really lot. Okay, so now you know how what is the equipment required to do astrophotography. You know processing, pre-processing, post-processing, and now you might be wondering how can I get into astrophotography. So as I already said, you don't have to cry on I don't have camera or really. You can just started with whatever equipment you already have. That is the best thing you can now. So you can just get started with anything, and there are uh, 4 steps or levels of astrophotography. The first one is beginner, then the second one is amateur, the third one is amateur, and the fourth one is professional. So beginner, so you only have a smartphone and a tripod, or a DSLR and a tripod, then you fall into this beginner and you are just getting into astrophotography. So you can see all these images are captured with a smartphone by some experienced astrophotographers. So let me tell you, none of these are mine. I will show the images that I have captured later. So these are just captured with smartphones, and like I said, the smartphone cameras have gotten really good, and they are capable of capturing some really good images of the night sky. You can take your smartphone or DSLR on a tripod, just follow the 500 rule or the NPF rule, set the ISO value so that the image looks decently bright, and just taking images. And finally, when you end with a bunch of such images like 15 or 20 images, you can stack them in softwares like Deep Sky Stacker and get the final result. Then after you have done some basic untracked wide field astrophotography, you might find the need of zooming into the objects and capturing them up close. So then you fall into this amateur astrophotographer level. So here you can see these two images are captured by some of my friends, and I have captured. So I have gotten from their Instagram. So the first one, the left one, is the Orion Nebula, and it was captured by Olga from Brazil, and it was captured untracked. So she used a 250 millimeter focal length lens. So that is a kit lens that most of the photographers might already have, and she used Canon 30D, which is the probably the most basic Canon camera that one can have, and she took few 2-second exposures. So like if you use the 500 rule, 500 divided by 250, so you end up with 2 seconds. So she correctly used 2-second exposures, and she stacked like 500 or so such images to get this final image. And this looks really good. That it wasn't captured with some fancy telescope or any tracking mount. And then there's also this Andromeda galaxy picture captured by another friend, and it was captured in a similar way. Then if you are done with deep sky astrophotography, that too in amateur level, like untracked level, then you can upgrade to a tracking mount. So these tracking mounts are basically smaller versions of the equator mount that I explained you earlier. So these are just made for DSLR cameras and telephoto lenses, and they have usually 5 kilogram payload capacity. So you can mount any telephoto lens and camera easily on it, and It eliminates the need of using the 500, and you can just take a 1 minute, 2 minute, or even up to 5 minute long exposures with these trackers. So this is the best or the most important step any astrophotographer can take in his astrophotography career. And then there the grade here. So this is actually, so you might be where to fall in this all levels. So to consider that I fall in this advanced amateur just behind this professional level. So I still this uh, fancy automatic scope setup. So in this see, this guy has used a really beefy telescope mount, which is the Skywatcher EQ6R Pro mount, and it has a crazy payload limit. Like it can take 35 hours of equipment. Then he's using a really expensive big lighting telescope, and also this guide scope and guide camera. So this setup is really interesting. So even though drones can track stars and galaxies in the night sky, they don't have kind of feedback system. They are just they don't have any way of knowing that if they are actually tracking the stars or not. So here, so that is where guides camera and guide scope comes into the play. So here, this guide telescope is a really small magnification telescope, and guide camera attached. We have a guide camera attached to the back of it. So what this app does is that it keeps on analyzing any particular star in the night sky, and it keeps on taking series images of the same star. And if the stars move, if the star moves even a tiny 1 or 2 pixels in the image, then this setup directly tells the mount to move into the other direction, so that the main imaging telescope keeps the object dead into the center. So that is why this setup is really good. Don't even I don't use this once in, so I am not. So this lastly, so like I said, these other levels use DSLR or mirrorless cameras for capturing these images. But here in this professional level, I using a one-shot color camera, and this camera basically has the same sensor of any DSLR or mirrorless camera, but they don't have any screen. So they just use like webcam, where you connect camera to your laptop computer and control the camera through your computer. So, and one advantage that these cameras offer is that they are cooled. So like I said, once you keep on shooting different series of images, your camera or your camera sensor gets really hot, and it introduces hot or heat noise, and that is really bad for astrophotography. So these cameras have Peltier coolers inside. So they cool camera below 50 20 degrees Celsius, below ambient. So that is really good for astrophotography. So this is how the professional astrophotography setup looks like. And yeah, so where do I stand? So like I already said, I am just slightly above this advanced amateur level, as I know, as I already use tracking and uh, advanced, but I still am not yet at this guiding stage. Okay, so now I will show you some of my images that I have captured so far, and I will explain how I captured them in the brief. So here, the first image is of our Milky Way galaxy. Uh, it was captured with a smartphone. Yeah, so it was captured with Redmi Note 7 Pro phone, and I took like 30 images of 15-second exposure each, and I stacked them in software called Deep Sky Stacker. And yeah, after post processing, this is the result. So in order to get an image like this, you need really dark skies. So I not be able to capture this image from Pune city if I had tried, and I was able to capture this because I was in dark sky zone where I am right now. So yeah, it is captured with a smartphone. Then this image, I was captured this image actually yesterday, and it was captured with untracked camera and a basic wide-angle kit lens. So I stacked 5 images of 20-second exposure each in this image, and after processing, this was the result. It was captured with Sony camera and 20 millimeter focal length. I followed the 500, so 500 divided by 28. So I ended up just around 20-second range. So I used 20-second exposures, ISO 6400, and stacked 5 of such images to get this image. Then here is another full dome or wide angle image that I made by stitching 50 to 60 images, wide angle images that I captured. This was actually this image captured right from the top of our terrace I'm sitting right now. I'm in a very red zone near just to Rajapur village, and this was captured from terrace with the same equipment, Sony A7 III camera and 28 millimeter focal lens. This is also a really good image last week. It was also captured untracked with a DSLR and a 50 millimeter lens. So I took, I think 60. Yes, I took 60 of this portion of the night sky, and each image was 10-second worth exposure time. So that is just around 10 minutes or so. And yeah, this is a really good image considering that it was captured untracked and uh, with a really basic lens. Then here is the of EDs and California again captured the same camera 50 millimeter lens, but except this was captured I had a tracking that I borrowed from Jyotirvidya Parisostha, and it was again captured from the terrace of our house. And here is this image and nebula that they made into the news. So this was captured with a telescope, a reflector telescope that had a focal length of 750 millimeters, and that was mounted on a tracking telescope mount. So yeah, I took 30-second images, and I took just 100 of such images and stacked them to get this final result. This is the image of Andromeda Galaxy that is again captured by with the scope that had a focal length of 7 millimeters. Took 30-second exposures at ISO 6400. I took 150 such images and stacked them to get this final result. This is the Horsehead Nebula, and you can clearly see this portion of this nebula looks like a horse's head, and that is why it is named after it, the horse head nebula. It is again captured from the same telescope, 700 focal length, captured from the terrace. I took 30-second exposures, and I believe 100 exposures, such exposures. Yeah, okay, thank you. So this was all from my side, and these were some of few of that I have posted on my Instagram, and you can check my other work Instagram at this given address. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. And I would encourage all the viewers to definitely go and check his Instagram posts. And the photos are really mind-boggling. Although, what I find, Aditya, is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it looks little challenging for a beginner. I will not even say amateur level or something. For a beginner, also, it looks very challenging. But once the interest starts developing, I'm sure that people will, try to go deep into it on their own. And as he was mentioning, in Pune we have Jyotirvidya Pratishthan, Can you also tell if there is a similar organization in Mumbai uh, which can guide people who are based there?
Uh, Actually, I'm not aware of any organizations in Mumbai, but I know a couple of friends who have such organizations, and I will let you know later. I just can't recall the name.
Definitely. Definitely. And what I was discussing with Aditya just before this presentation is we will conduct a few sessions on the outskirts of Pune for people who would like to get introduced to what exactly astrophotography is, how to decide where to track, when to track, what are the basic nitty gritties of it. So we will shortly come out with that. Meanwhile, I have got some questions, Aditya, on my WhatsApp. One of the question was while taking the photos
Yes.
on. Okay, it says while taking photos on mobile phone, are they taken with or without any software for clicking them? And have you used the software later? So I think the software is used later.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, so like I said, you need to take a few 20 to 30 images and stack them. So if you can actually one by one images camera, like I said, there are apps like Deep Sky Camera or Astrocam, which let you program these of taking 30 images touching the camera. So it is actually easier to take images with these apps, and they're all free apps, Deep Sky Camera and Astrocam. So I usually use both of these, and they let me take sequence of images without touching the camera. And then after you have got these images, you need to load them in pre-processed softwares and then post-process them.
Okay, thanks, Aditya. There was one more question. Okay, the question says, how do you take care of the camera or camera battery while you are doing this? So I think that is answered by your setup and everything that comes with it, if I'm right.
Yeah. So a really good thing that my camera has it's USB charging while shooting. So I don't have to care much about battery because plug in a power bank or USB charger, and it keeps on charging while I shoot. But really, people carry a couple of spare batteries and swap them in between sessions.
Okay. There was one more question is do people generally take photos from different locations, stack them together and have a final photo?
So if you want to include some interesting photograph image, you can shoot from different images. like like I said, like I showed, I took a couple of images that had some trees and interesting foregrounds. So if you want that, you can change your location and shoot from different locations. But if you just want to shoot zoomed in objects like the Orion Nebula or Andromeda Galaxy, you can simply take images from the same
Okay, got it.
place, that because it doesn't actually matter if you are in the place or in another.
Okay. There is one last question, Aditya. It asks, do people still use the old way of taking astrophotography? That is anyone still using film cameras to do astrophotography? And how different is it?
Okay, so I know a couple of guys on Instagram who take photos with film cameras, but it is frustrating because you have to focus by experimenting. You can see anything on live view, right? So you have to experiment with focus. You have to experiment with exposure values, and like I said, we cannot get real time feedback, so we need to wait, we need to process, develop the film, so that we know that if we have their image focus or not. So it is frustrating, and that is mostly nobody uses film cameras anymore for photography.
Right. Yeah. Those were the questions, Aditya. And if there are a few more questions or comments that come through to me, I will share them with you. And I would like to
Yes,
thank you on
sure.
behalf of everyone for a wonderful presentation. It was very much in detail, yet you kept it very interesting. So thanks a lot again for that as well. And I'm sure you will keep on clicking some amazing images in the years to come. And hope to have you soon with one of our field
Yes,
trips so
thank you.
that it will give a different experience to all our people.
Yes, thank you so much to you
And we wish you the
too
best
for
for your
giving opportunity.
engineering as well. So, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us on Sunday morning. And we will see you soon in another interesting Facebook live session, which we are having about railway photography. The details I will share soon about it. And next Sunday, we are having a day trip or a morning trip, morning session trip to Saswad, where the focus will be birds of prey and something else which is very interesting. I will not share it on this platform right now, but you will have the trip details loaded soon. Thanks again, Aditya, and all our viewers for joining us. Have a great Sunday ahead. Bye.